Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. There's been a video that's come to my attention about Go Transit. Okay, not really. Of course, YouTubers talk. We all actually kind of know each other, especially in this sort of space, and that's pretty great. But yeah, there was a video about Go Transit and I want to talk about it. I want to talk about why Go Transit is good, why it's probably a lot better than you think, but also why it is the way it is, and why the changes happening on the network right now constitute the largest transit project not just in North America, but in the Americas as a whole right now. Now, before I go on about Go, I should mention Metrolinx, right? Who is Metrolinx? Well, Metrolinx is a much younger agency than Go that also contains Presto, Toronto's smart fare card. And these days, Metrolinx designs, builds, and plans much of the transit infrastructure around the region, including rapid transit, so your subways, light rail, and bus rapid transit lines. At this point, Go simply maintains and operates through contracts the regional transit network. Now, I'm going to be honest, it would be inaccurate to say that Go isn't car-oriented. I've said it myself, there are massive parking lots and parkades at basically every station outside of the city of Toronto. But it isn't a solely car-oriented system. I mean, I don't own a car and I use the system all the time, including to my recent trip to Niagara Falls. And things are changing fast. But before we talk about the future, we have to talk about the history. Go started because the region surrounding Toronto, known as the Greater Golden Horseshoe, was exploding with growth in the mid-20th century. And even the massive highways we have couldn't keep up with the population and economic expansion. That same expansion has this region now constituting more than a quarter of Canada's population. And so that imposing car infrastructure and the sort of centricity of Canada around the Greater Toronto area is part of why the less car-oriented regions of Vancouver and Montreal often don't like Toronto and refer to it as the center of the universe. Now, while Go was built to relieve highways, that construction or building was really just building stations on existing train lines. These lines were old freight lines that were left underutilized because of the changing dynamics of the Canadian freight railway system. Now, the relationship between freight railways and Go Transit is absolutely critical to understanding why the system is the way it is. The Greater Golden Horseshoe is one of the economic and industrial powerhouses of North America. And when you look at freight rail in Canada, we move more than 30% more freight by rail in Canada than the entire European Union does. Now, this freight railway history can get glossed over sometimes, but the changes we've seen are already enormous. The entire area south of Toronto's Union Station at the south end of its downtown used to be warehouses and railway yards. Now it's one of the highest density neighborhoods in all of North America. Of course, a lot of strange things about Go are also explained by that freight railway connection. The reason Go doesn't have level boarding, for example, is because if it did have a traditional platform system, then freight trains simply wouldn't fit through the stations. It's also the main reason that Go doesn't have modern European-style trains. Until recently, they were essentially illegal in North America because of our harmonized train regulations, which have allowed the freight rail system to be so efficient. Essentially, the concern was that the light trains often used in Europe would likely crumple if they were to hit a freight train, and that's not an ideal situation because crumpling is something you generally want to avoid. Now, over the years, Go has consistently purchased bit by bit of the railway network it operates on whenever a freight company decides it doesn't need this section of track. And so now Go owns most of the tracks it operates on, sans for a few key exceptions. But you have to remember that when those tracks were sold, the freight companies didn't just give them away with no conditions. They had to maintain interoperability so that if the freight railway companies had a client on a line, or if they wanted to be able to move through the line in a case of an emergency or a railway shutdown, they would still be able to. And that's restricted Metrolinx's ability to design the infrastructure purely for passenger traffic. The fact that Toronto's railway network is so centered around freight is why a station like Bloomington, for example, has so little train service. It's located on the main railway line connecting Eastern Canada and Western Canada. And this was very noticeable because while we were standing on the platform waiting for a passenger train to show up when we checked out the station, a lot of freight trains went by. Of course, it's also easy to forget that Go Transit has never really been about Toronto. Sure, Union Station is the entry point into the city, but most riders are not from Toronto. They're from the suburban cities and regional towns, and even rural villages that the GO train network serves. Now, a lot of these places are incredibly car-oriented, but I can't necessarily blame them for being that way. They were mostly developed during the auto boom, and a lot of the cities surrounding Toronto have had to cope with massive population growth in the last couple decades. For example, a city like Mississauga has more than quintupled in population in the last 50 years. And when you're growing that fast, I can imagine how you might not self-reflect on, maybe we shouldn't be building so many roads and maybe we should start building some train lines. By comparison, Toronto itself has a competent network of streetcars, fantastic buses, and a great subway system that's expanding quite a bit. By comparison, the suburbs leaned on Go, and it wasn't until recently, with Metrolinx's aid, that the suburbs started developing their own bus rapid transit and light rail systems. That being said, at this point, some of Toronto's suburbs have among the best transit in North America, and that's actually good. North America generally, yes, not great transit, but we do have some good systems, and some systems in the Greater Toronto area like Brampton have truly been incredible success stories, running frequent bus services that have picked up tons of ridership. That said, the divide is still there, and if you talk to a lot of people in Toronto, they'll tell you they've never been on a GO train, because those are for 905 suburbanites. I and a lot of other transit advocates want to change that, because GO Transit offers an incredible opportunity for Toronto to have not only faster service, but also more capacity and just more travel options in general. Of course, the densest part of the entire Greater Golden Horseshoe region is also a massive ridership opportunity for GO, and if GO gets more ridership, well, that should mean more trains for everyone, which is a win. Now, GO isn't just about trains either, though. It also has an extensive bus network, and I don't think we should be quick to dismiss it. Well, some of the buses on the GO bus network do suffer from getting stuck in traffic, and it's pretty brutal. At the same time, many of the bus routes are a critical part of the regional transit network. The buses connect communities that aren't directly on rail lines, universities and colleges, which are major destinations that are also often not on rail lines, extend rail service, provide overnight service, and provide the critical suburb-to-suburb sort of radial or orbital service that the train lines all heading into the city center just can't. GO buses heavily take advantage of the Toronto region's east-west highway network, and highways can be good for transit. I talked about it in a video up here. It's also worth pointing out that some highways in this region are basically never congested, whether that be because they are tolled such that they don't become congested, or simply because they just don't have enough lanes going into them to make them congested. Many of GO's most popular bus services take advantage of these low congestion highway routes to provide fast, convenient, and comfortable transit service from one side of the region to another. And it's not just highways. Metrolinx has also built some pretty extensive bus infrastructure, including the Mississauga Transitway, which is a bus-only road that connects one of those underutilized highways, Toronto International Airport, and Mississauga City Centre and beyond. That gives buses a very nice, high-quality, dedicated route completely out of car traffic. And Metrolinx has a lot of new BRT routes planned, so I can only expect the bus network is going to improve. At the same time, the actual facilities of the bus network have gotten way better just in the past year. In December, Metrolinx opened a brand new multi-level indoor climate-controlled bus terminal at Union Station to serve both GO regional services and intercity buses. And in January of this year, they opened a new bus terminal at the Kipling subway terminus to serve buses headed to the west of the region. And the GO buses pass a smell test in the city of Toronto that they're actually well used, even when the trains sometimes feel like they aren't. When new train service opened to Hamilton, there was instantly outcry about not cancelling a parallel bus service that operates on the highway because of its fast, convenient nature. And I even used to use a GO bus quite frequently to connect from the northern parts of Line 1 of the subway network. Now, we do have to talk about train stations, and you're probably expecting this to be depressing, but trust me, it isn't so bad. Does GO have way too many parking garages? Yes. But Metrolinx has quite publicly said that they don't want to keep building them, including all the way up to the CEO level. They simply own a lot of parking, and it's frankly enough. New stations on suburban extensions not only will have all-day service, not necessarily only oriented towards peak 9 to 5 commuters, but they'll also focus more on transit access and accessible modes. And while they still will have a small parking lot and pickup drop-off area, that's not unlike train stations in the rest of the world. Better yet though, most of GO's new planned stations won't have parking at all and will be used to connect to rapid transit and high-quality local transit within the city of Toronto, as I discussed in a video up here. In that case, people will be getting from a GO train to a subway or vice versa without ever even seeing a car. Now, just as with the GO train service, there's a divide between the inner parts of the region and the outer parts. As I mentioned before, the city of Toronto has great transit, and as it turns out, maybe not coincidentally, GO doesn't have a single parkade inside of the city of Toronto. And in many cases, those stations in Toronto are starting to see high-density mixed-use development. That's already happening at stations like Mimico and Danforth on the Lakeshore Line, and massive proposals are also being worked on at many stations, like East Harbour, for example, which will be a massive office district. My local GO train station, which I frequently use, is located in Toronto, and I walk or take the bus to it. Now, since GO is expanding its track infrastructure so that it can expand service, it's also doing lots of work on its stations across the network. Now, I've done videos on basically all of those station upgrade projects, and I'll link my playlist in the corner. Suffice to say, newly built stations are mostly world-class. They tend to have multiple canopied, weather-protected platforms with pleasant waiting areas and heating built directly into the platform so that snow doesn't accumulate in the winter, as well as bike parking and all of the other nice amenities you'd expect in a modern train station. My local station, Milliken, is also getting a grade separation as part of its station upgrade, and as part of that grade separation, we'll get a new pedestrian bridge and new bike lanes, and people in my suburban neighborhood bike quite a bit, but right now they do it on the sidewalk, so new bike lanes will be great. Now, many traditional GO stations are in the middle of nowhere. Sorry, Pickering. But as I mentioned, this is a vestige of the network's past, and lots of work is being done to change this. New extensions and new stations are being built to bring trains closer to walkable urban areas. And as I mentioned before, new transit services are springing up left and right to try to connect people to their local train station. And at the same time, high-density development is also happening across the GO network, not just in the city of Toronto. Now, on one hand, this isn't happening soon enough, but on the other, I'm actually sort of comfortable with the fact that high-density development around GO stations has been slow so far. The reality is that it's unlikely that Metrolinx develops the land on its parking lots itself, and so it's probably going to sell parking lots off with a certain set of agreements to developers so that they either build new space or build bike access or the like. The truth is, though, that it's probably worth waiting to sell off the parking lots until these stinky diesel trains have been replaced with nice, sleek electric ones, because whether or not that was going to happen anyways, it's clear that the value seems much higher when the electric trains are there. It's also worth mentioning that not every GO station is in an industrial wasteland, because some of GO's train lines are just more traditional passenger train lines. For example, stations like Hamilton, West Harbour, Brampton, Guelph, and Kitchener are all in pretty pleasant walkable areas, and because in many cases these stations are starting to form sort of community transit hubs, they're getting upgraded and connected up to things like bike lanes and new transit infrastructure. On the other hand, major stations like Rouge Hill and Exhibition connect people to major destinations, so the whole GO network isn't necessarily only for suburban commuting. Of course, some train stations are located in suburbia, but they can be improved massively simply by improving bike and transit access. Unfortunately though, while all of this stuff is happening behind the scenes and often with shovels in the ground, it's not always clear that the infrastructure is coming and that the changes are coming, and this is just something that transit suffers with in general. Just like how a new station like Bloomington GO reflects the decisions of past decision makers, infrastructure we're deciding to build today won't be visible for several years, and that's just one of the realities we have to deal with in transit. Now, of course, I can't make a GO train video without talking about GO trains, and let's be honest, they're pretty nice. The bi-level train car design used by GO Transit and created for GO Transit is arguably the most popular in North America. And honestly, I like them. They're comfortable, spacious, and the new ones are quite well equipped with plugs and USB ports. But clearly we do need more, and the good thing is that more is coming. Electrical multiple unit trains and electric locomotives, like are used in the rest of the world, are coming. A massive contract, and when I say massive, I mean really massive contract, to electrify most of the train network and provide a whole new fleet of trains is currently being negotiated. And there's funding approval from all levels of government on both sides of the aisle. The only reason it's taking so long is, like I said, it's massive. There's going to be thousands of kilometers of new electric wire strung and hundreds of new trains. And the cost of the project is comparable to something like Crossrail. Toronto will have the best regional rail network in North America when GO RER is done, but it's going to take some time. That said, we don't have to wait. New European-style trains are finally rolling out in North America, which means that when whoever runs the network orders the new trains, they'll have some good options. It's also good to know that basically all the infrastructure built on the network for years has been planned to be compatible with electrical wires, so the clearances on things like tunnels and bridges is all great. So while we'll probably still be waiting about a year before we really know what electrification and service expansion for the future looks like, what we know is that once it does happen, it'll be rolling quite quickly. Of course, the biggest problem with GO is the service, right? Well, yes, but also no. Of course, if you look at the Go network, it operates a poor service compared to regional railways in Australia or Europe or Asia. But the truth is, you can't look at a network that is being transformed and look at it as a static thing. Part of the reason it looks like Go service isn't that great right now, for example, is because so much of the network is being expanded. Service has been cut back so that more track work can happen. Nearly every line is seeing track expansion work. 2 lines are being double-tracked and 2 more are being quad-tracked, while strategic track expansion is happening across the network. At the same time though, a major tunneling project and a major bridge project in another place in the network has meant that certain lines just simply can't see their service expanded until those linchpin projects are completed. That said, when all of the construction currently underway is complete, which should be in the next couple of years, the entire network will be capable of operating high-frequency, all-day services across the region. And while other North American transit agencies, even those with fully electrified transit networks, were cutting back service during COVID, Go kept its service. And that was an incredible show of confidence right here in Toronto that transit is important and that the service expansions we're seeing are here to stay. I have to mention the service expansions I've seen just in the couple years I've been in Toronto. The first time I visited Toronto, we had one 30-minute rail line and that was it. And since I've lived here, we've gained the 15-minute Airport Express service, hourly service on 3 more lines, 15-minute service on the Lakeshore line, service expansions to Niagara Falls, and more service to places like Kitchener and Barrie, and now service to London, as well as hourly service to Hamilton. So just in the past couple of years, the expansion has been pretty crazy. And the pace of change is only going to accelerate as track expansion work completes and service goes from 1 train an hour to 4 or 8. And even on routes like the Richmond Hill line, which has low service because it's primarily a freight line, investments are still being made. For example, moving a Go station to be right next to a subway station to make connections easier. So Metrolinx is making reasonable investments even on its lines that will probably remain commuter-oriented for the foreseeable future. Go has so many problems, but things are changing. A giant commuter rail agency designed to do one thing, changing to something completely novel in North America is a hard challenge. We don't have a ton of people here who know how to operate a frequent mainline railway, or know how to manage overhead electrical lines, or know how to operate a modern mainline railway train, but we're learning. Of course, tons of political battles had to be fought, and a lot of mega projects had to be built before we could even get to where we are today. And we aren't there yet. Lots of people still push back against the idea of less parking at stations or densifying the areas around transit hubs. And that's why YouTube videos like this one and every other YouTube video about cities or cycling or transit or development is so important because it's about changing minds. And often changing minds takes longer than building new train tracks or new stations. That said, I don't take a car to the Go train, and I don't plan to start.